In this video, I'm going to give an overview of time series analysis. I'll explain what the key concepts are and, and then give some examples of why and when organizations might want to use this. And then I'll conclude with giving considering some advantages and disadvantages of time series analysis over other approaches to solving the same kinds of business problems. First, we need to understand what time series data is. That is, what kind of data might you consider for time series analysis? In time series data, each row of data represents an event. And an event is something that occurs at a specific point of time. And this is a key issue, that each row is a distinct event of some sort. Then rows are ordered strictly from the first event first, the next event, and so on in sequential order all the way to the last event. These are the key elements. Each row represents an event, and rows are in strict sequence from first to last. That is time series data, and that enables the possibility of time series analysis. Now, there might or might not be a column that represents time. So this is a time attribute, and this might be specifies the year that event occurs. If it's one event per year, the date. It might be a date time, as in this example. There's a date component and a specific time component. Here you have hour by hour. There might be a timestamp, but in some way, this date or time column represents the time element of the event. However, that is not required. Some time series, such as this here, is a completely valid time series, as long as it is understood that each event occurs one after the other in sequence. Now, because we don't have time, we don't know after uh, how long of a time each event took. So we don't know for sure that the time between event 1 and event 2 is the same as the time between event 2 or event 3. But that doesn't matter. All that matters is that there is a strict sequential progression. That is valid time series data. So once you have this kind of data, the basic idea behind time series analysis is that you are predicting. And the terminology here is forecasting. So the fundamental goal is to try to predict the future values of whatever you're trying to predict. And typically, you're not predicting just one future value, such as if you have 10 data rows, you're trying to predict just 11th, but you're trying to predict a whole sequence of future values, like the next the next five values that would come after the end of the sequence. So in the context of time series, this is usually called forecasting. So time series analysis is regression analysis over time. So it uses linear regression or other machine learning techniques that carry out regression analysis as the underlying statistical basis, and normally predicts specific numbers, but advanced forms or adaptations can predict categories. Um, the key element of time series analysis is that it uses past values of the target variable to predict future values, rather than the other rows in the other values in the same row to predict the target value. It uses past values of the target to predict itself in the future rows. Time series analysis is a type of supervised learning. And that means that there is an idea of true or correct values. So the model is trained on the past true actual data, and it is evaluated based on how well it can predict known values. So there is a baseline of whether forecasts or predictions are correct or not. Now, let me give some examples of time series analysis from a business perspective. So, major retailers such as Carrefour or Auchan process millions of transactions every day. And they want to, two key things that they're constantly predicting are how much inventory they need to stock in order to to have enough products so that they don't run out, so that when customers want to buy things, they have things in stock. And these retailers would also like to know how much sales they can expect to have. And so day by day, they know the number of sales, but they would also like to know amount of sales, both in number of products and also in euro amounts of what they actually sell. So from one perspective, suppose that we're here in, we've had January, February, March. So we have a year of data and we're trying to predict how much inventory or how much sales you'll have in the January of the following year. Well, that could be a regression problem. You take the various characteristics of the data set, such as what the product type is, industry sales, perhaps weather, and other things that might affect sales. And based on that, you make an estimate of what the January amounts would be. Standard regression approaches could do that. But if they want to look at how what they expect January, February, and March sales to be based on what the sales amounts or the inventory amounts were for the previous year. That is time series analysis. So they're not just looking at what the other determinant variables might be for January. They're looking at what has been the trend of sales for this year looked like. Have sales been going up in general? Have sales been going down? And also, is it January? Perhaps every January sales tend to dip. Uh, Maybe December is a high month typically, but January is a low month. So finding those seasonal patterns is another thing that time series analysis can do that just regular regression analysis cannot easily detect. So this would be an example of time series analysis. Another example from the areas of human resources and business process management is help desks need to be manned or need to be staffed by people who are able to respond to customers' inquiries. So customers want to call for help from the company, and the company wants to provide high quality service. And one of the main things of high service is that customers don't wait on the phone for that long to get someone. So in order to have enough people so that customers can be responded to quickly, the company wants to have an estimate of how many calls there would be at different times. However, the company doesn't want to have too many people on staff. Otherwise, they're just sitting there without customers calling, and that could be quite expensive. So, estimating how many customer calls there would be at certain times is a challenge. And time series analysis can help with this because the company can look at in the past month how many calls have there been hour by hour during the week, based on the day of the week, based on if there's a holiday or not, based on if it was lunchtime or not. So what time of day exactly was it? And and they might look at other things as do they have a major product updates where customers might ask for help more than usual. But by looking at these past trends at different points in time over the past month or past 2 or 3 months, then they can make an estimate over the next week how many customer calls they anticipate hour by hour. And with this estimate, the company can then know how many staff members to have on call. So when they expect more customer calls, they'll have more staff members on call. And when there's fewer customer calls anticipated, then they can assign some staff members to do other business tasks and not just leave them on call without answering anything. So because the company is looking at the past history, hour by hour, day by day of customer calls and trying to estimate for the next week or so, hour by hour, how many calls will come, that would be an example of time series analysis. So now I come to some advantages and disadvantages of time series analysis. And advantages and disadvantages are not absolute, but is specifically compared to analyzing the same kind of time series data using standard machine learning techniques. So the advantages are, first of all, time series analysis looks at past data and it tries to detect the trend or the signal or the pattern, and it distinguishes it from systematic noise. That is, presumably, there is some kind of trend or pattern to where, if it's sales you're predicting, if it's inventory levels, or if it's the number of of help calls you get from customers, there's a pattern there. But there's also noise. There's some randomness. And time series analysis tries to detect the pattern or the signal and distinguish it from the random noise. So another point is that time series analysis can include a lot of things into your data analysis that your data set does not contain. So for instance, if you're trying to predict sales, but actually over the past year, there might be some political upheavals that might have affected your sales, but it's not in your data set. Time series analysis, by incorporating time, and it implicitly includes things like that. Or it might be extreme weather event that might affect your sales positively or negatively, because that is something that occurred over time. That is kind of implicitly included in your analysis with time series analysis, whereas other techniques only explicitly include the data that you have in there. Then any data analysis techniques will have imperfect predictions. There will be some error in their estimates. Well, some of that error is because there were trends over time that, regardless of what one particular row of data might say, the trend also has an effect on the new value of your target variable. And so by taking trends into in consideration, time series analysis do account for some of the error. And in general, time series analysis provides highly accurate predictions. Even the classic, very simple time series analysis techniques has very high predictive value for future events, and so it's quite useful in that way. However, there are some disadvantages compared to standard machine learning techniques of time series analysis. Uh, First, it's rather complicated. There are a lot of things to consider, so it's not so easy to do well. There's automated software such as RapidMiner that make it a lot easier. Even Microsoft Excel has some built-in forecasting tools that make it easy. But for really detailed analyses, it's rather involved. A second disadvantage is that there's a strong assumption in time series analysis that the future will continue to resemble the past. It's looking at the past data and trying to project it into the future. Now, I'm not just talking here about the general assumption that all predictive analytics has, that the future will resemble the past. And everyone knows that the future is never exactly the same as the past. That's not the main concern I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that managers have a job to actually make sure that the future not resemble the past. That is, a manager is supposed to study the past and look at what happened in the past. And if sales in the past were at a certain level, the manager is supposed to change the future so that sales levels go higher. If maybe production errors were at a certain level, a manager is supposed to intervene to change the future level of errors to go lower. And so with time series analysis, a manager is looking at the past and trying to project past trends into the future, but a manager is expected to make things better in the future than what the past trends indicate. And so if a manager is successful in doing that, then their time series forecast will be wrong, not because the analysis was not sound, but because the manager deliberately intervened to make it wrong. And that's what a manager is supposed to do. So this is a major paradox and not widely talked about, but that is one of the limitations of any analysis that assumes that the future will or should resemble the past. Another concern with time series analysis is that forecasts don't usually incorporate all the information that might be available. For example, in this little data set where you're trying to estimate the amount of traffic there might be on a highway, time series analysis will look at the past traffic and try to predict what the future traffic will look like. But time series analysis does not normally consider other things like, well, what's the rain level at that time? What's the temperature at that time? There's a lot of other factors that affect what you're trying to predict other than the past trend. And time series analysis does not usually sufficiently consider these things. There is multivariate time series analysis that tries to consider these, but it is limited and often not quite as predictively powerful as classic time series analysis, which neglects some of these factors. So this is another issue. So with these examples, you should have an understanding of what time series analysis is, the kind of data that is appropriate for it, and the business cases with some advantages and disadvantages.